Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March 6th, 2024 episode of Roundup, brought to you by the Broom Radio. How to intro this, I'm not really sure, but thank you for tuning in, if you're tuning in. If this is your first time ever listening to the podcast, then welcome. If you're returning to listening to the podcast, welcome back. And also thank you to everybody who's here live in this container. Right before I hit record on this, we were kind of scrying the astro of the moment. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And yeah, I would love to hold space if anyone wants to chime in about what their impressions are, or like come off mute and share. Oh yeah, Ahmed in the chat is reminding me that I had also brought up a topic that I wanted to address as well, which I'm just going to pull up the Twitter thread that Nobu posted in the safety channel. But yeah, basically it was like a pretty cohesive rundown about like basically like what it takes to sustain a community, I want to say. And yeah, I just felt like it was pretty poignant in regards to tending and gardening in the broom. Yeah.
For the people who are listening and can't read the thread, would you like to say more in like specifics about what the thread was about or who it was by?
I have to pull it up because I'm just like going off what I remember from it. Yeah, it's by Rose at Curzy Rose on Twitter. And it starts a thread on when empathy is not the right response. Your community needs sheepdogs. Sheepdogs are people who can set boundaries to protect the sheep from the wolves. So basically, I'm going to open it and see. Basically, she was like laying out dynamics of like I can't pull up the whole thread. I welcome any of y'all to chime in too about it. I feel like I got a little choked up, not in the emotional way, but I like froze a little bit.
Ahmed says, sounds like some Karl Popper type shit, justifying the use of the stick.
Wait, who?
I haven't read the thread, but you sort of mentioned how you see parallels with the thread to tending. So why don't you just tell us about, kind of what you resonated with the thread from what you remember and how it resonates with your current role?
Thanks, Ahmed. I appreciate that question. Um, yeah, I felt like it was just like talking about the dynamics of like what it means to like sustain a community and like lead a community basically. Like when it makes sense to like basically like not tolerate bad behavior anymore, like when makes sense to like assert boundaries, when it makes sense like not to allow people to be in a community, like um just all these sorts of things that I feel like we have moved through in forming the broom. And like, you know, please feel free to disagree with that too. But yeah, it felt like it was just cool for me because I was like, oh, I don't think this person has like anything to do with the broom. And yet, like, she's talking about things that feel like really close to my own experience.
Do you want to say anything more about how the work of Karl Popper relates to this for you, for the people who are not necessarily up on philosophy of the early 20th century?
Yeah, I would love to know too, because I don't know who Karl Popper is.
So actually, I haven't read this thread. I'm just going off of that little short summary that you just gave. But
Mhm.
he had the idea of the paradox of tolerance, where basically, you know, communities or a society that's very tolerant of all sorts of ideas lets in intolerant ideas, just because of wanting to be tolerant. But it's that intolerance that then wins over. You know what I mean? And then that's what the community becomes. It turns into an intolerant community because you were too tolerant of all the intolerant people. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, his whole idea is, basically punch a Nazi. You know what I mean? Like the whole like general idea that, you can't just have open arms for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for explaining.
My only, and I don't know if the thread touches upon this, but my only like thoughts on that whole paradox of tolerance is I agree with it. I agree with the sentiments, but I'd say two caveats are that one, I feel like many times it's used to justify not taking the route of compassion. And I don't mean that
Mm-hmm.
the route of compassion is being accepting. I mean it's maybe tackling the problem through its roots, which could take longer, which is more painful and is a lot more effort. It takes a lot more effort. So,
Mm-hmm.
why do that? We can just punch a Nazi instead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the other thought I have as well is I think I think there's a difference between being intolerant towards the people who are crafting the intolerance, who are intentionally setting it up, versus the rubes who fall for it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like more prevalent in like kind of like what we see in politics and all that sort of stuff today, where
Mm-hmm.
like I'd rather tackle the idea of misinformation and critical thinking, and I'd go after like the Stephen Millers as opposed to just any person who falls for that ideology. You know what I mean? Even though I'm vehemently against it.
Hmm.
Right, like why is Hillary Clinton talking about, um, yeah, like I'm going to say poor white people shielding as deplorables, but she's not going after the people who necessarily, I mean, rhetorically, not going after the people who put them in states of being which leave them vulnerable to intolerant ideologies, right?
Right.
In fact,
That
I
part.
mean, why is she perpetuating them?
Hmm.
Yeah, and like I don't blame her for that either, because again, like if you're going for the simpler route of just solving the problem fast, yeah, that makes sense. Just eradicate every sign of it. But again, the longer thing that takes more time, right, is that route. And I understand why people just don't have the time or the patience or the priority to do that even. So I get where they're
Mm.
coming from.
That's very tolerant of you, Amit. Sounds like No, I mean, I think that something you brought up about the difference between, say, like having compassion for and accepting it is interesting to me. Like, I can imagine being able to sympathize or empathize, I forget which is which right now, with the desire to like solve a problem or like at least like put a problem aside so you can work on some other problem. But without like necessarily enabling it to happen, right? So like I've been thinking about like things through like the framework of having a child recently, where it's like, you know, maybe if like a child felt like throwing a hammer at the wall, I would be like, oh, like, so like, why do you feel like doing that? Like, what's coming up? Like, do you remember when you first felt like picking up the hammer? But I wouldn't like be like, hey, like, why don't you throw your hammer at the wall, and then maybe we'll talk about it afterwards,
Exactly.
and then
I
maybe throw the hammer at the window just to see if it feels any different.
I honestly, I mean, I'm just laughing in resonance because, like, you know, because I was a toddler teacher, like, this is how I often view things. Like, well, if I was dealing with a small child, like, it's exactly that. Like, sure, we can talk about like why you're doing that, but like, I'm not gonna let you do it. Like, if it's unsafe, I can't let you do it, you know? Like, it's my job to like protect the
Mhm.
child from harm, you know?
Yeah, or like,
Green. Thank you for that word, Hoda.
yeah, kind of. I also feel like I would like. I mean, maybe not with a toddler or something, but like at a certain age, you might be like, well, can you convince me that it's a good idea? It's like I don't feel like it would be a great idea to throw a hammer at the window, but you know, like maybe I'm just not seeing things the way, like, you know, like I'm not on your level.
I wanna hear from Adam because Adam's like, "They will, though."
Oh yeah. I mean, in my experience, they have a rationale. Why'd you do that? Because they'll have an answer. Because you made me mad. Because I had to pick up that hammer. You made me mad. It's that simple and clean for them.
Hmm. And then you'd be like, well, I would be like, what did I do to make you mad?
Right.
I mean,
Yep.
again, like if we're talking about like people who are really poor and like really stressed out and maybe sometimes inebriated in order to cope with that stress, or maybe just like, you know, with like threadbare nervous systems, and it's very difficult. Obviously with toddlers it's incredibly difficult. Sometimes some people might be more or less difficult than toddlers, but I kind of want to bring it back, I guess, to like the context of the thread that Anna was trying to load on the somewhat functioning website we know as X slash
It's
Twitter.
just not loading. That's why I was like, I don't know why I couldn't get myself to just be like, "I'm sorry, you guys. The thread isn't loading coherently."
Yeah,
But it
I
wasn't.
mean, speaking of things that we tolerate, I'm very surprised that people. I'm surprised, and I'm not surprised that people seem to be like putting up with what's happening with X, um, because of like the social stickiness of it.
Mm.
But to bring it back to the contents of that thread, I guess like what comes up for me is that like intolerance is like not the only like wolf move that I feel like the thread is relating to. And I think like the core dynamic of that thread is that um, I think it does relate to like tolerance and intolerance, because I think we're talking about like the violence of the sheepdogs and the violence of the wolves versus like you say like the violence or the like the appetite for violence of the sheep. And like, you know, for me the metaphor is like useful because people kind of understand these animal archetypes in some way. But I think like it's not that useful in the sense that it's pretty obvious like what a sheep looks like and what a wolf looks like. But I wouldn't say it's obvious what good behavior in a community looks like or what bad behavior in a community looks like. I wouldn't say that it's obvious when somebody is like embodying sheep energy versus wolf energy. And I feel like there are many behaviors which are perhaps like not obviously violent, which can be detrimental to the health of a community.
Oh.
And, you know, one of the members of the broom or the pot in the broom, matcha latte, so fancy. Matcha latte was talking about somebody at her work who I would say like mostly behaves in a way which is not healthy for the community of their work, if you want to call it a community, which might be a lot of a stretch for a lot of people who work in, say, like corporate America. But yeah, like not obvious like wolf behaviors, not obviously like unhealthy behaviors, and probably more obviously sheep behaviors, because she was talking about somebody who can't get her job done. Like there is a mismatch seemingly between her skill and or capacity and what is expected of her in her role. And, you know, on the surface of it, that could look like sheep behavior. But, you know, maybe to like ground it again, like reconnect to what Ahmed brought in about Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, I would say that like the same thing can happen with stupidity. The same thing can happen with like I'll say like incapacity, right? Where it's like if you continually like coddle stupidity or like a lack of skill development or a lack of will to develop skill and or capacity, then your society also becomes less skillful and generally has less capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like perhaps like in a lot of like different parts of modern society, we end up like having to coddle even more because of the lack of skill and capacity.
Yeah.
But then in this example with matcha latte, the person who was also performing poorly at work sounds like kind of threw some high performing people under the bus, which I would say is more of like a wolf move. So, you know, like there's bad sheep moves and bad wolf moves in this example. And I just kind of wanted to like talk about it because I feel like it's maybe some nuance which might be skipped over by somebody like reading the thread.
Yeah.
Which I understand was like written in such a way in like in order to perhaps like make a broader point more accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that nuance that you brought in. Where it's like you're not. Also, Hoda was like, "Can we talk about the different roles? The sheep, the sheepdog, and the wolf?" And I was curious what was coming up for you, Hoda. If anything.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was typing that before Nobu kind of like flushed out some of the thread. And I feel like now maybe people have, I know I have a better idea of like what a wolf would be in a community, what a sheep would be in a community. The role of the sheepdog still feels a little bit elusive to me. Like right now, I want to call it the enforcer,
Mm-hmm.
but that might not be like the most accurate. So yeah, it feels a little bit more elucidated now. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Also, I'm like, it kind of it kind of sucks that she like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people, there's like a joke about people like calling other people sheep, and so I feel like, I don't know. That was coming up for me. Like, I don't want to be like on the record as calling anyone sheep. This was just simply the language that was used in the thread.
Yeah. I mean, this is like why I feel like I was pretty specific and explicit about talking about sheep behavior and wolf
Yeah,
behavior
as opposed to like,
because
yeah, the labels themselves.
behavior is mutable.
Yes. Yes.
The fact that like a person is a person is like not mutable
Mhm.
without like death, basically. But yeah, I think in general, like labeling people in ways which come from like generalizations about some of their behavior in some contexts is pretty fucking unhealthy. I'm gonna like sheepdog that behavior a lot, pretty often. Julie said, ironically, I feel like sheepdog gives mother energy. It's interesting to me because, like, I get that, like, the term, like, the portmanteau means, like, a dog who works with sheep. But then for some reason, when Julie said that, I thought of, like, a dog and a sheep, like, creating some kind of hybrid life form, which is, like, half dog and half sheep. It reminds me of one of my friends because like we'd go to a restaurant, they'd be serving catfish, and it'd be like what catfish? Like that doesn't make sense. It's like cats like to eat fish, so like how would you get to a point where like a cat and a fish would procreate and create a hybrid life form? Um, it just kind of tickled me. It reminded me of the idea of like beginner's mind or like looking at things as if you don't know anything. Julie says, which is the butt and which is the head? I feel like, you know, I grew up in the West, so I'm like a left to right person. So I'd be like sheep head, dog butt. But I'll say, like, in my mind's eye, I'm definitely seeing sheep butt and dog head. Oh, that's a good example. Could be right side dog, left side sheep. I feel like there'd be like the sheep would be probably it would be weird. They'll walk around in circles because one side would be heavy
I was thinking of
and the
cat
other side
dog
would be
too.
light. But you know, I'm down to keep talking about like the exquisite corpse characterization of a sheepdog. But I feel like what I'm kind of like coming to is like the necessity of people to eventually embody sheep and dog behaviors. And you know, to be real, if
And
we're
wolf.
talking about like wolves as like actual animals, like they're not just like violent, right? Like they also embody
Yeah.
a bunch of qualities which are really like, you know, like in some ways I'm saying like maybe we should like model ourselves less as like a pack of sheep who need protection from wolves and more as like a pack of wolves.
Oh, now this I like. Also,
Yeah.
yeah, I like it because the wolf is like a really prominent like symbol and archetype in women who run with the wolves, which is like, you know, I love that book. Anyway, I feel like somebody started talking and I cut them off.
It wasn't
That was
me.
me. It was me.
Sorry,
I
I'm
was gonna say that I'd again, this is like based off just like lived experience, but I'd argue that most wolf behavior are caused by like kind of unknowingly by people who who think they are sheep. And has that been y'all's experience too?
I can definitely say, like, in my experience of being in the broom and having like sheepdogged out some wolf behavior, that yeah, some of them probably felt like they were behaving like, well, I'll say like some of them probably felt like they were sheep in the broom, and some of them probably felt like they were sheep in like the broader society that the broom is a part of, which is sort of like global human society, right? And some of them felt like both, right? But I think like probably like the dominant pattern that I found was that people who felt like sheep outside of the broom came into the broom and they felt like lions,
Yeah.
or they felt like sheep who were being seen as potential lions. And yeah, in some ways I feel like what I'm kind of like tuning into is the way in which like when we like live in a society which doesn't like make us feel often like we are heard, then a lot of our expression ends up being bottled up. And then sometimes when you find a place where like that expression, there is space for that expression to come out, it can sort of like shoot out like mayonnaise out of, you know, like a small packet of mayonnaise which gets stepped on in the parking lot.
Oh my gosh.
And like I would say like in the broom, like it felt like wolf behavior, even if that person perhaps felt like they were a sheep. And I think there's like a lot of like bouncing back and forth between those archetypes within the embodiment of a person in those dynamics where it's like, yeah, I feel like I can see how somebody who feels like they're mostly treated like a sheep doesn't feel like they're capable of behaving like a wolf in any container.
Ooh.
And so they're not aware of how like their behavior is like quote wolf like unquote. But you know, I think again like step back a little bit from like these really obvious archetypes. I'll say like people who are often not heard probably don't have a great sense of when they're taking up a lot of space.
You know, you make a good point there.
Can you say more about the greatness of my point?
It just makes sense. Like, if you'd never like, it just makes sense to me. I don't know if I have anything else more than that.
Well, I mean, I guess like what I would say is like, yeah, like it takes reps, right? Like people, I feel like mostly men will say things like this, like it takes reps to figure out like when you're taking up too much space. Like you
Right.
kind of have to like take up space and then see when you're not taking up enough space and then try to take up more space and then see that you're taking up too much space. And then maybe in like a different context, it's going to be different because there are different people in that container. So you like go through that adjustment process again. And then you're like, oh shit, like I figured it out. Like I am the master of space. And then you go into another container which has completely different people and you realize that the space is completely different. And like maybe you felt like you were a master of space because like you were like round and then you end up in a container where you have to be like flower shaped or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't say that like people tend to think of that as wolf behavior, but I can definitely see how it's like not healthy for a community, right?
Yeah.
You know, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious, how do y'all deal with that situation? I've been guilty of that myself, but funnily enough, very timely. It's actually something I've been dealing with someone else. Um, it's one of those things, like topics I've just been avoiding talking with this person, but now it's actually reached a bit of a head because of avoiding it this whole time. But I mean, I see it as like a energetic hygiene problem is the way I see it. You know what I mean? And yeah, I'm just curious, since y'all, it sounds like you've dealt with this quite a few times. How do you actually deal with someone in that situation then, where you want to give them that space to actually be seen, but not just take up the whole room either?
I'm so glad that you're talking about how Lexi takes up so much space in these audio containers, Ahmed. So, because I've been thinking, I'm just fucking around because I know that Lexi never unmutes. But I'm really glad that
so far.
Finally somebody's talking about the fact that Lexi always unmutes in audio containers and doesn't give the mic to anybody else. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm really glad that you talked about it as an energetic hygiene problem. And I also want to draw a connection. I think it was the Sharia Way book club, but maybe it was field tuning. Where we were talking about non-verbal communication of how somebody's taking up too much space.
Oh yeah, that was in Sharia Way book club.
Yeah. And what I was kind of asking people to do is talk about okay, what are non-verbal examples of how people do this? Because people say 80 to 88% of communication is body language. And then I was kind of thinking well, if we can articulate verbal ways that people try to let other people know that they're taking too much space, and then we can talk about the ways that people use body language to let people know that they're taking up too much space, then maybe that leaves room for so-called energetic aspects of communicating that other people are taking up too much space. Yeah, Adam says astral man spreading. But I'm curious, why you say it's a. Well, I'm curious first of all when you say it feels like a issue of energetic hygiene. Does that include non-verbal expression? Does it include verbal expression? Does it include sort of the tone of verbal expression, let's say? Or are you talking about specifically things which show up immaterially or in ways that we cannot perceive as being material? And then secondly, I'm kind of curious if you have any examples of I guess what makes you feel like this person takes up too much space?
I think it's the content and frequency that dictates it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the content? But less than that, how often do they come back to it? So it's whenever they want to refer to that content, energetic hygiene, because is it mostly where is the need for this discussion coming from? Is it coming from a place of wanting to actually have a back and forth collaboration and discussion, or is it just you vomit out your points? That's an energetic hygiene problem to me, And then the frequency is how often do you call back to that topic? Is there again a energetic hygiene problem of overthinking, coming back to rather than having distinct phases of topics or conversations, it's just all over the place. You know what I mean? Which is why things just keep getting brought up again and again, as opposed to actually being resolved or moving. As opposed to progressing, you just keep running out in loops.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it takes so much space.
When you said vomiting out points, I literally I laughed in a way which caused spittle to come out of my mouth. But yeah, I'm really glad that you broke that down, Ahmed, even though I had to like wipe my phone a little bit. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the behaviors that you're talking about kind of end up in, I would say, like different categories of materialization, right? But then I feel like for me, like at the bottom of like all of these behaviors which manifest as like frequency or constancy or like volume or like disorganization of like their expression of what they're trying to relate, and like repetition, like beneath all of that, I would say there's like something that's disorganized in their field, right? Like, I kind of think about like how somebody's subtle body can be sort of like a continuous wave which just like moves and changes shape to take up the quote appropriate unquote amount of space in any container. And then when it's disorganized and there's like cracks between different rigid parts of their self, it's kind of like, I think about like one of those toy dragons where you have like bits of wood and they're connected by like a string or something. And like the wood, like when the dragon is bending, you can see the string. And that's kind of like what I'm seeing when it comes to the energetic hygiene of this person. It's like in certain containers, like they end up bending and then like this shit comes out. And it's like, yeah, it manifests itself in like, I'd say like fixation with certain topics. And then that fixation makes it difficult for them to perceive, I would say, the expressions that other people who are in containers with them, or like sharing space and time with them, or paying attention to them, or giving awareness to them, it becomes difficult for them to see when those people are agitated or when they would like to take up space which is not easily available without, say, like interrupting that person or telling them to shut the fuck up.
Well, now I understand why I have a problem interrupting people. Thank you. Ah,
I mean, it's really subtle for me because I definitely feel like you have to interrupt people sometimes.
yeah.
But I feel like I can tell when someone interrupted someone and it comes from like crystalline energy, I'll say, and versus like when it comes from like not being able to tune into the container.
Interesting. Yeah.
It says sheepdog behavior needs to be done when it's needed.
Yeah.
That's a tautology. That's a tautology. But yeah, I feel you. It's like when people say it is what it is. Or like, yeah, it needs to be done when needed.
Wait, what is tautology? I know I'm familiar, but I'm not.
Everything is everything.
Oh, that's a thought terminating cliche. That's how I know it.
Well, it's an example of a thought terminating cliche. I don't think all thought terminating cliches are tautological. Like what I know it as is like circular reasoning. And sometimes the circle is much larger, but I think when you say everything is everything or it is what it is, it's a very tight circle. Or if you say it needs to be done when needed, it's like sort of like a medium tight circle. But, maybe like the person who has poor energetic hygiene that Ahmed's talking about has like much larger and like more annoying and stupid circles. But yeah, I think like a lot of thought terminating cliches are actually like incomplete loops, right? Ahmed's bringing up the example of a koan where it's like it actually it's maybe like not cliche, although they become cliche over time. Like an example of a koan, which I wouldn't say would be called a koan because it comes from a Taoist tradition and not like a Zen tradition, is the master does nothing, so nothing is left undone. It's like there's no circle there. In fact, it's almost like you're busting through. I'd call it more of a spiral, but I would say it tends to terminate thoughts. And I would say it's cliche because it's a line from the Tao Te Ching, which is like pretty famous. But you know, in that case, I'd also say like a koan which terminates thoughts, or a saying which terminates thoughts, can be like, it can deliver a moment of what people call Zen. You know,
Right. Well, yeah,
Sometimes
usually.
it's not good. Sometimes it's not good to be thinking. I don't think. A lot of the time, probably.
Very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But I mean, I agree. I agree for sure.
But yeah, I think like what Ahmed was asking about was like, how do you deal with like the kind of thing that he's been dealing with this person? And I feel like eventually I would say it's nice to tell persons that they're doing things which feel a certain way to you. You know, like in the tradition of nonviolent communication, it's like, when you do this, I feel this. And this is what I feel the impact is. When you do this, I feel this. And then I feel what the impact is. But I feel like, you know, most people are probably like capable of more artfulness than this. Yeah, you have to use like the Barney voice.
Please use that voice.
2 plus 2 is 4.
I feel like it is poignant though. Like I feel like sometimes it can be kind of robotic or like feel
Totally.
like sanitized or something.
Right. Which to me feels like a form of violence in itself. It's like, if you're not tuning to the container and like using the appropriate expression, I would say that's violent, because I feel like tuning into the container means that you like somehow accommodate the perspective. I won't say accept, I won't say understand, but like there's like something that you're doing to make it so that perspective doesn't feel like put in a jar or repressed, so it can like take up space, so to speak. And then you're moving around it and you're finding an expression so that that person can see what they need to see, whether you express it directly or not.
Wow.
So, you know, they have an opportunity to change, right? I feel like saying like, when you do this, I feel like this, and blah blah blah. So you have to like change is like not. That's like coercive, right? And I would say that like in like workplaces, nonviolent communication is like used really coercively, sometimes passively, sometimes aggressively.
Yeah.
Sometimes directly, sometimes aggressively. It's like, when you do this, I feel like this, and this is the impact on the ability of this corporation to achieve its key performance indicators. And then like sometimes the implication is like you're gonna get fired, and sometimes it's like directly like, and if you keep doing this, you're gonna get fired. And then I would even say sometimes you can be like, you're gonna have to leave if you keep doing this, and it doesn't have to be aggressive. It's just like, you know, we operate within a marketplace, and we are just one of many competitors. And if we're not competing well because people are obstructing us from getting towards, you know, delivering what we need to deliver for people who need the things that we deliver, then either someone else is going to do it, which might be fine on a social level, or maybe they also suck, and then people who need certain things aren't going to get what they need from anybody because of obstructions to performance, right? Per my last email, Linda, why you scream? Per my last email is like, that's like high key, like passive aggression for me. It's
like, fuck you, man.
right. It's like, which you may or may not have read, or you may or may not remember because you have a stupid little brain.
Adam, what are KPIs?
Key performance indicators. Adam, I am in a corporate setting
What
right
do
now.
you
Don't
think
you
this is,
understand? Yeah.
Adam?
Per my last email.
That was the worst possible word I could have used with you, too. Of course, we're in a body. My apologies.
All right.
But you know what I meant. Just like
why.
Nobu in a private sector, and I know you had spent time in the tech sector, but like seeing your personality at the Broom in like a cubicle farm was really funny to me for a moment there.
Cubicle farm. I mean, I never worked in like an office space like environment, but I feel like Microsoft was definitely the most like office space like, which I think like Mike Judge may have worked at Microsoft, or he may have worked in Pacific Northwest tech companies, which like for me the Pacific Northwest is the most passive aggressive place on earth.
Not the Northeast.
No, nah. I feel like people in the Northeast have elbows.
Yeah, I was about to say maybe it's just more aggressive.
It's more aggressive, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's more passive and more passive aggressive. But yeah, I feel like the Northwest is like I mean, it could just be like a linguistic mismatch type of thing where it's like maybe things are really direct and loud if you're also from like the stock of Swedish and Nordic people who became Americans. But I would say like most people, especially for like a tropical brother who grew up in Australia and like very, both of those cultures like very direct. I think going to Seattle was like, whoa, like y'all like seem to like not seeing each other or making eye contact or saying what you really mean. A lot. Anyway, but yeah, that was a pretty unhappy corporate setting for me. But I think like going back to what Ahmed was saying, I feel like I've pronounced Ahmed in like so many different ways because I feel like it's not a name that people pronounce consistently in experience I've been a part of. But and I think it probably is a name which comes from many different cultures with many different nuances in like pronunciation. And then I think it's also a name which like shows up a lot nowadays in Western culture, and it's like one of those names I think I'm just gonna guess where people were like, well, this person's not gonna pronounce it anyway, so I'll just say they can call me like I know an Ahmed who like is Egyptian who grew up in Australia, and one of his friends was just like, why don't you just rename yourself to Adam? Because like no one's gonna pronounce your name properly.
Oh my gosh, that's so insulting.
I mean, this person was also Egyptian. This person just like, yeah, like why would you like hamstring or like that? Like, and he also, I think he did like experience a lot of bias coming to Australia like in the early 70s, which was only a couple years after Australia had officially ended what they literally called white Australian policy. Yeah. But yeah, I've gone back to what Ahmed was saying and like how to deal with this kind of person. I mean, I feel like building rapport makes it a lot easier both to understand like how they perceive being heard, and then also like developing experience so that you have examples to talk about things with them, and also like to build trust so that they believe what you're saying. And I feel like this is very hard to do when somebody is like vomiting all the time, because it's like, why would I want to build rapport with this like fucking tire fire, right? And I'd probably invoke what you were saying before about like sometimes you just don't have the time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to do this. Sometimes it's not your problem. But I feel like for me, like martial art is about becoming more and more efficient in reducing harm. And that's like reducing harm to me from being vomited on by this person, and like reducing harm to them because they continue to experience rupture in like containers because people just like stop listening to them or stop hanging out with them and they don't tell them why. You know, reducing harm to other people who are in containers with them, etc., etc. But you know, I think like earlier, like I didn't even like mean to say anything about like Anna interrupting. I didn't say anything to Anna. I just talked about like weird energy shit, and then Anna was like, "Oh, like you helped me realize why I interrupt people." Right? So like to me that feels really efficient because I'm just talking about something else. I don't even have to have like symbolic conceptual grasp of like I'm not like in the back of my mind being like like I hope Anna like realizes that she interrupts. Blah, blah, blah. But like it feels efficient to me where somebody got to see something about themselves. I don't even need to say whether it's correct or not because that person sees it, and I would very, very rarely like correct the way someone sees something about themselves. And I was also able to be doing something completely unrelated to like the direct task of applying martial pressure to Anna. And I feel like it was probably much easier for Anna to see whatever Anna saw about herself because I wasn't doing that. And also I was having fun. It's very unfortunate that Ahmed's getting a call right now from my perspective, but I hope that helps.
Thank you for that rundown.
I mean, I think to bring it back to like, see, I'm like closing the loop, the circle, but bring it back to the side on like sheepdogs. Whew. I mean, I feel like that happens a lot in Peru, right? Like where people end up seeing things about themselves without necessarily like directly receiving work. I think like a lot of people end up receiving things about themselves directly from seeing work, and having work applied to them. And then I'd say a lot of people see things about themselves while having work directed to them without seeing the work, which is something we've been talking about for a while because it's not particularly sustainable for everybody. But I think, yeah, in some ways, I feel like, yeah, if we want to use the sheepdog, wolf framework, it's about like building like a community of sheepdogs, perhaps including people who start out as wolves, and perhaps including people who start out as sheep, so that like sheepdogs can like help sheep in the broom, and wolves in the broom, and also sheep's outside the broom and wolves outside the broom, to be better citizens. To be better sheepdogs. It's like a sheepdog virus or something.
What?
I don't know. I feel like there's like a cultural virus, which like I'll call it a virus just to be provocative, but like, you know, it's a virus that changes sheep into sheepdogs and it changes wolves into sheepdogs.
I feel like I don't have traction on what you're saying. A pandemic
Well,
of safety shielding, says Hoda.
it's like a behavior which propagates itself like a virus. So like with the virus, you have someone like feeling like shit, and then like their eyes are watering, and then they sneeze and cough on people, and then the people that they sneeze and cough on start to feel like shit, and their eyes water, and they start to sneeze and cough on people, and then they make more people feel like shit, and have their eyes water and they sneeze and cough and people, it's a virus, right? But I would say that the behavioral pattern which cause people to see things about them, and then get better at seeing themselves, and then eventually become better at helping other people see things about themselves, is also a virus. But I would say it's a virus which leads to like health in communities versus like dis-ease in communities. A generative virus. So for this stuff.
I feel like there must be a concept for that. I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Said I feel like there must be a concept for a generative virus, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
I mean, I feel like the closest thing I can think of is like a movement or like a trend.
Yeah.
But trends tend to like peter out, I would say.
Right.
And movements feel really vague. But like I think like to make it really specific, I'll say like tolerance feels like a movement, right? Like, you know, if we look at like the civil rights movement in America, I would say that like, yeah, in some ways there is all like there's like discrimination. I feel like we can also talk about like the cultural wars around like wokeism and then like backlash against wokeism as examples of how like have say not completely generative, right? There's like a movement which are like generative and then also like I want to say like polarizing and inflammatory characteristics. So maybe not like a perfectly generative virus.
Is there such a thing?
I don't think so, like etymologically, because like perfect means like finished. And I feel like any virus which like is finished is not really like cultivating life, because life is like almost like
ever unfolding,
fundamentally unfinished, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like it's possible for like viruses to improve and become less inflammatory. And I would say like more health producing.
Evolve. Yeah.
Did you say evolve?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's often difficult to say on like any given scale of time whether evolution has occurred or whether like de-evolution has occurred, right? Like I think for me, like the inflammation that we're seeing around like wokeism and like backlashes against wokeism is part of like a larger arc of like reintegration, right? Like the same way that like when we get sick we might have a fever because the body gets really hot because it's trying to kill a lot of like bacteria or pathogen material.
Yeah.
And then you resume health. Thank you, Ahmed.
Oh, sick.
I think they're called mutualistic viruses when they increase the health of the host. Sorry, Anna, if you were going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember how we got or like what happened since you got your call and came back, Ahmed.
I mean, I remember talking a decent amount about how to deal with people who have bad energetic hygiene, which causes them to produce a high volume of erratic word vomit. And then I feel like I talked about how this dynamic plays out in the broom. And how I feel like it probably plays out outside. I mean, I'd say in my experience, it definitely plays out outside of the broom in a way that is connected to what I've learned in the broom. But yeah, I mean, it's recorded, so if you do feel called to re-listen to it, you can listen to it. Oh, man. I don't know if we're gonna actually like post this to the podcast or not, because we're starting to get a little bit more like close to the chest with that stuff, so people actually join us in the broom and learn how to do this kind of stuff a bit more often. Maybe see that work is happening either directly or indirectly, and then start to support some of the work that we're doing in the broom, so I don't have to live on the streets and perform sexual favors for McDonald's.
What a sell.
Somebody's been like, oh, I can start
That is very specific.
for long enough. I'm just going to McDonald's and receive sexual favors.
The fact that your audio is cutting out is hilarious. Oh man. It's so interesting for me to do these containers at like 10 o'clock at night.
Welcome to my world, or my world at some points, because
Right.
nowadays I do it at 10 o'clock. Is it 10 o'clock there for you now? I guess like there's some time zone switch, but it's 10 o'clock in the morning for me.
Yeah,
But
it's 10
like I'll be doing like the tending call at like 11 p.m. for me.
Yeah.
Today. It's the most difficult of time zone differences in some ways.
That's the price we pay.
Yeah, there's definitely work happening in the broom. There's definitely work happening behind the scenes in the broom. And it takes energy for sure.
Mm-hmm. So with that,
I was kind of wondering if we were going to talk about like the juicy like post-recording container that we held in the Shadow Book Club, relating to like different like origination myths from different lineages, because that was really juicy.
oh shit. Should have said something earlier.
No, that's okay. I don't do should, Anna.
You're right. You don't.
Ahmed says, since this is a town hall, what are y'all's hopes of how the broom develops? Since it seems like you guys are focusing a lot lately on trying to get people here. It's funny you should ask about that. What do you think, Potter?
Well, I'll just say that there's a lot happening behind the scenes. All of the recruitment that you guys try to see like online of us promoting and advertising the broom is literally done by the tenders. And so yeah, if there's a question if like work is happening in the broom, it doesn't even really feel like a question to me, not to invalidate anyone's ask, but it definitely is happening. And I think that switch of focus has come from, like, I'll speak for myself, I think just the realization and recognition of like how much richness there is in the broom and like how much is offered for like free, which is crazy to me in the room. And so yeah, there's a lot happening. I don't think I can speak on all the details just now because they're still gestating, and that, like, it feels like it would be premature of me to like speak to them. But yeah, there is much happening, and if you're listening to this, definitely scroll down and like click the Discord link. Make sure you have Discord downloaded on your phone or on your device, and join the room.
Please. And tell your friends. And like, yeah.
Does anybody else want to answer Ahmad's question?
I hope that we get paid. That's what I hope for the work that we're doing. Yeah. Hoda says,
I'm definitely.
Oh.
Sorry. I was just gonna answer. I'm very hopeful to see lots of like amazing conversations, just more people engaging. You know, I'd love to see just a lot of activity, and so that's the most. Oops, sorry. My dog has found a rat, I think, possibly. I have to go, but I'm very excited about what's happening. I think the channels that are being created have facilitated really interesting conversations, spreading really interesting lineages, as well as allowing people to truly express what they're feeling, how they're processing information, how they are processing and connecting things in their own sort of body mind. And I think that's really cool. I mean, I've never been in spaces like that before. So I'd love to see more of that, more people join as the team's talking about.
Yeah, I would like to see. I think that like the Discord moves maybe pretty quickly for a lot of people, but I also feel like there is a lot of processing and self-recognition and integration which occurs in the broom. So I'd like to see ways to like scale that for more people, because I think for me, helping people to become healthier is like paramount. And I think that relates to putting out slightly different forms of content over a long period of time. I feel like it definitely relates to having like a website where people can find content and consume it, either in the form of quotes or like through the form of like transcripts or more like summary articles, and also the recordings and maybe even sort of like clips of recordings. And then I also feel like what Hodo alluded to in text is like, I believe it has to, at some point, like the work that we're doing with the stick to try and create a place where people can report, I'll say like shielding spiritual abuse. I believe like that will eventually become like sort of like a trusted practitioner directory, and then maybe become a marketplace over time. And so like I can imagine most people probably not going to go to Discord because it does move quickly, and I don't think it's possible for the work that happens in the broom to happen without the Discord moving quickly, because often people need to talk about things before the work can be applied. And then often when it's applied, they need to talk about things for the work to be integrated. And it takes time, right? And if everybody's doing that in one space, then you're going to end up with a chat server which moves very quickly. But I feel like that's also why people like need to like do this work, let's say like one-on-one or like in smaller groups outside of like the main part of the broom. And then I would also say this is like conducive to helping practitioners sustain their praxis so they can continue helping people get healthier. So yeah, I think like eventually, like maybe we can like squeeze more volume out of the Discord server so more people can get helped without creating stuff which is going to feel like noise to other people. But I feel like eventually we'll have a website where people can like access our content in many different ways, and then also access like lineages and lineage wisdoms, and also access like directories of practitioners who I feel are safe to work with and who the rest of us feel are safe to work with also. I want to read out that Julie said, I was going to say I see it as a lively hub for both practitioners and clients. I'm envisioning a revolving door and also lots of flora. ATP synthase. I love that, like from like the really poetic to like the biochemical. Um, whoa. I guess the ATP synthase does look very like floral, huh? Isn't that interesting? I feel like ATP is basically like one layer of what we call like ki or chi. Please disagree.
I don't know what it is, so I can't agree or disagree. But
It's some people call it like the currency of the cells.
interesting.
Stands for I mean it
And
stands for like the Association of Tennis Professionals, but it also stands for I think it's adenosine triphosphate. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly, but basically it is maybe Julie will have like a better description of this, but I'll say that it's like how cells communicate with one another.
I see.
So like often when I'm talking about ATP, I kind of talk about it as like nodes that get stamped with like the expression of DNA and like yeah, which is basically like I'll say like the perspective of each cell, and then those notes get sent to other cells so that the cell can get what it needs, and then also it receives notes so it knows what it needs to give to other cells.
Our
Julie
bodies
says
are
what
so cool.
Julie says what fuels all cells in our body and thus our body via our mitochondria. Yeah, and I feel like it's accurate to say that mitochondria are mostly they basically drive the production of adenosine triphosphate, which I feel like is really interesting because the DNA which relates to like our mitochondria has a specific source in the sense that as far as I can tell, like mitochondrial DNA mostly comes from our matrilineal ancestry, like our mothers' lineages. So I feel like there's some really interesting stuff there.
All right, well, I'm feeling pretty complete. I feel like, yeah, how do y'all feel about letting Craig leave the building?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I'll just say before we let Craig go that like some of the stuff we're talking about now, which I would call like spiritual science, which yeah, it is like biological in nature, but I feel like it's more specific to talking about the parts of the body and bodily function which relate to intelligence, which has a perception of itself, aka spirit. I feel like I would love to see more of that developing in the Broom over time. Because I feel like substantiating what we sometimes loosely call quote energy work unquote is a really big part of making it more accessible intellectually to a lot of people who could probably benefit from it.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, I feel complete now.
Nice. Yeah. I'm excited about that too. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. And yeah, peace. I don't remember how to stop the recording. That's hilarious. All right. Bye. Thanks for listening.